going to kind of let it funnel in and get some more people. Just wait a couple minutes here. But yeah, today we are going to be going over our routine C on our level 1 training. So with that being said, we'll kind of just wait a few minutes before we start really jumping into this. But kind of what I want to bring up is, even to kick it off is just kind of the intentionality behind it. And so we'll kind of dive into that, like why build in. So for those of you that are more accustomed to the My Strength, window, and then I have a whole bunch of athletes coming in who are used to a whole different setup and approach to exercising. So I want to actually tackle in on some of those like concepts of why have a day like this, right? And I mean, Mike, you kind of come from that background as well, right?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
You have a little bit diverse profile as far as, I and more so I would say it's always important where you're gathering information, right? Like it is really important to see, is this a credible source in the first place of, who am I coming from and why listen to this person, right?
Right.
And so I think that's a huge part. I want to give a shout out to Pete Samardzija, who's in the audience listening right now. I was on Pete's Zoom calls last week, which was a lot of fun. For anyone interested, Pete hosts Zoom calls on Wednesdays at 10:30. Now, Pete's actually a goalie coach, and the funny thing with him is although he's a goalie coach, there's so many takeaways you can grab from a coaching perspective or just a life perspective. Because in some ways, we're always operating as coaches, right? We always are being students, and in some ways, we're always being coaches. We're always some ways learning stuff, and there's other ways where we're always being taught stuff or we're teaching stuff at the same time. So I think it's really cool when you hop on his calls. He has a great audience. Brings in some really cool perspective of just, it's a little bit of the athletic world, but at the same time, it's just like little takeaways you can always be gathering. So it's always fun. And that's Pete. I think I know Pete mostly through Instagram, and it's at Attitude Goaltending, but yeah, there's a couple of ways you can link. And I think Pete's going to hop on one of our Zoom calls. So for all those who aren't familiar or want to gather some more information, Pete should be hopping on one of our Zoom calls, I'm guessing, in a couple weeks here. All right, Mike, how you feeling?
Feeling good.
Yeah, so I want to lead the charge a little bit on what makes day 3 so different, or routine C, and why I say either or is for the whole perspective of routine C in a lot of ways, whether you call it your day 3 or C, the relevance of it is, I look at it from an intensity standpoint, right? Of our routine A, B are more our high driven days, right? They're days where we're trying to get as much output from our muscle groups as possible, right? And why build in this routine C is this is, so much to do with charging your system. It's not a whole intensity driven day. It's actually more of a technique driven day, and more or less, it's actually practice rehearsal, in my opinion, for your routine A day. So, even if I were programming this, and this is where I really think something special about this program is the fact that you kind of get in touch with your own body. You are like, let's say you can't even maximize a lot of these muscle groups. I would say it is relevant to, I think it's good to respect a time period on rest periods between your days. It is important to take 24 hours off, but I will dive into this a little bit in a later concept, but it's this idea of, if you aren't able to actually incorporate these muscle groups and it doesn't feel like you're adding a lot of intensity into these workouts, it's like, let me ask you this, Mike, if something wasn't very intense, let's say I said, Mike, go for a 20-minute walk. Would you call that high intensity?
No.
So the reason I say that is because it is good to distinguish points like this. If something isn't that intense, you do need to spend more time in that movement. And so that's where I want to actually backpedal a second and just hang on to that idea for a second. Just because, so last week I got an incredible gift that I just wasn't expecting, I guess. And I got to hang out with what I would call a Minnesota legend. But it was with the U of M strength coach, Cal Dietz. Have you ever heard of Cal, Mike?
Yeah. We did, had a couple classes with his book, Triphasic Training,
Mm-hmm.
in college. But yeah, I had a couple guys who actually, or no, I didn't have a couple guys. Couple of my buddies actually interned for him. I think it was their senior year. So
Yeah.
I had a lot of cool stories about him.
And Cal's something special. I mean, one, there's legendary stories, I'll say. Like there's stories that are just more mythology, and I think it's just great. It adds to the influence of why he is like, for those of you who don't know Cal, Cal does play a big influence in a lot of people that I got trained in on before I came to My Strength Studio, is people I was intertwining with. And Cal's reputation sometimes stems further than him, because he kind of likes to, he's a scientist at the end of the day. He loves, in some ways, hiding behind the curtain and testing products out all the time. And he's always trying to play with his ideas and reinterpret and reinvent and always. And I think that's the special part, because for those, and it's hard to look into Cal's information because he's so detail oriented that, like, for instance, I was working with a pro athlete and he needed to see Cal. And so I kind of came actually as you would say, what would be the term you describe this as? I'm his translator. Like, Cal's so ingrained and so in depth, and I can be like this too sometimes. I have to sometimes hold back on the depth, but I try to always be at a sustainable source where people can regurgitate this information. But I think that's a special part sometimes about these YouTube series is, let's say you can't gather information. Sometimes it takes listening to it 3 or 4 times to actually sit back and reflect and, like, what are the main concepts we're going through, and why is this important? And so why I kind of relay this into our information in this day 3 is, in the modern fitness world, we're kind of left with a lot of, like, uncertainty in some ways. It's always testing and it's always evolving. And why I say that is because you should be in almost that same pattern of how are you really going to evolve if you're never really reflecting and translating your own body, right? Like, this is more of a personal journey than it is actually just, it's not just listen to rules. It's kind of like you have to be the determining set point for your rules. And why I say that is, for a really advanced athlete, I could hand them this and they could only do 1 set because they're so ingrained with their body that they could bring themselves to failure within a time period, let's say.
Right.
And the modern fitness industry, in a lot of ways, looks at 3 sets and 10 repetitions. That's just a given standard almost, right? I mean, I think you would agree with that, Mike, right?
Yeah, that's the go-to for everyone.
That's a gold standard, as you might say. But it's kind of like, why? Why 3 sets? Why 10 reps? Why these continuous tempos? And I would say the more advanced you actually get and in tune with your body, the less time you actually have to spend. It's like, if you go to failure and you fail out of a movement pattern, there's no reason to add in another set. There's no reason to add in another rep necessarily, right? And so that's what I think kind of makes some of these workouts really special is this idea of, you get to interpret, like, if you're if you're intertwining yourself and you're taking notes, you're going to know the intensity you hit in that workout. And that should be your standard, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what's special, and I want to jump into this workout. I don't want to go on a whole tangent, and obviously I can go on a ton, right? Like, you've heard me rant about stuff at circumstances, but why I'm saying this is, we're about to exit in some ways level 1. And, we built out level 2 and kind of phase 2, sorry. We're about to exit phase 2 and we're about to enter into phase 2. Me and Kevin did all the programming or filming last week or 2 weeks ago. And so we're getting that all prepped. But why I say that is, we're entering the 4 to 6 week phase, right? And it's kind of like, well, what do we do after this phase, right? What do we aspire to next? And that's at the end of this webinar, what we're going to dive into is what is the next standard? What are the standards? And that it's kind of, how do we actually, in some ways, interpret this information and see how it applies to us in a lot of ways. And I know that's kind of long-winded and it's kind of out there in some regards, but why I'm saying that is it's really important, right? Like, if you're only hitting 60 to 70% intensity, and this day is built for that.
Right.
But on your A and B routines, if you're not hitting a 90 to 100% intensity, you're doing 1 set at 90 seconds, it's good to get in tune with that. That's a perfect reason to reach out to us as coaches so we can get you in the pathway. And in fact, if you're not, you might have to do 2 sets to see if you can actually hit true failure. It's part of the playing aspect. And I want to jump into this last point before we hop into our series, and I'll walk through what Routine C is all about. But why I say that is when you look in the fitness world, there's two different modules. It's the high intensity training, which I think is very applicable to what we're trying to accomplish. But if you're not there yet, right? If these movements aren't intense for you enough, it might be because that you're not just in tune as you should be. And so why I say that is it's good to play around with some of these movements. Take 1 or 2 sets, take an extra 90 seconds, or come back to it at the end of the workout if a routine doesn't feel hard enough. If you've stuck with the video so far, I mean, I think Mike can be a proven example that it takes 1 set at 90 seconds for Mike to get to failure, right?
Yeah, right.
I mean, you feel it, Mike. I mean, I watch you on this end. I'm just here to talk through stuff.
Yeah, I'm feeling it. And like I was on a coaching call last week, and the person I was working with said that they work twice as hard with someone watching them and someone instructing them how to do everything than they do on their own. And that's just one way that we can help you guys is
absolutely
is to be there and get a coaching call with us so we can kind of push you to that point. Because like was Nick was talking about with the intensity, that's something you kind of have to learn in a sense, and it's not easy to just start with and to just have it. And I don't think I fully have it either. There are times where I'm like, I'm gonna give up. Like this is too hard. And it's really helpful for me too to have Nick here to kind of instruct me through it and kind of keep me going so I can hit that failure that I need to hit.
Yeah, I mean, the whole reason we're doing these videos is to almost give you the feel of what one-on-one coaching is like, right? I mean, in a lot of respects, and why I am partially like, I won't even go back to a point. So what's cool about our concepts right now, what phase one and what makes us very unique? I mean, I could go on a whole rant of how we're different than every other influencer out on the internet trying to make something happen out of nothing. But if anyone's listened to me rant enough for a long period of time, which are most of the clients that I've worked with, and I'm a full believer before any of this coronavirus hit the embody weight movements. And it's like, if you can't master some of these movement patterns, it's the whole reason to get and dive deeper. In some way, they should be a little bit frustrating. But that's what's special about this program. I mean, routine A, yeah, you can definitely hit intensity, but it's a movement-based day. It's a range of motion-based day. What's cool about the routine B, and if you haven't seen routine B, check it out on YouTube. I think it's MYO, and just type in like routine B and it should pop up. And what's cool about and special about routine B is now you take out all these other platforms and all you're focused on is almost this isometric driven period of time, right? Where you're challenging your muscle, but you're not having to focus on the range of motion. You're not have to focus on the moving muscle group. You're just simply in that position to set up stability, like you are stabilized in that position. So, and now we run into our routine C, which once again, I call this the practice day. This is the technique day. I'm actually even probably going to step down on a lot of cueing just because I want Mike to hang out and honestly I'm going to give Mike a little bit of time after he does the movement to kind of walk us through what he was feeling in that movement. I think that's the beauty you can bring on especially today's movement. Before, is out of breath. So it's tough to throw the role on Mike of, what's going on, right? Yeah. But yeah, I mean, let's dive into it. So once again, routine C, it's based on this concept. It's a general preparation phase. And it's this idea of we're going through general movement patterns that should be sustainable. It's not given for intensity. Once again, the intensity level should be about 6 to 7. And honestly, if you can build it up to an 8 or a 9, go for it. But it doesn't have to be that way. I would say if you are able to bring it to that intensity, what I would say is the fact that if your new 8 or 9 is your high intensity, if you were able to bring these movements that high, reevaluate your routine A and B, and that's pretty complex. But if you're able to take general movement patterns and build up the intensity on these days, think about progressive overload. Progressive overload doesn't just apply to weights. Realize it applies to how well you're able to initiate with the working muscle group. And so that's what I'm here to instruct in a lot of ways is as we go through these movements, what are the working muscle groups? And if you're able to do that, reevaluate A and B. And so that's where I'm going to talk about at the end of where do we go from here in a lot of ways. So let's walk through 6 movements. First one's going to be our step up. Let me ask you, are you choosing to use a chair at all? Do you want to stabilize with the chair or are you good?
I probably won't. No,
Yep.
I'll probably not use a chair. I think I'm good.
Why I say that is if you're someone who wants to get a little bit more in tune, and I honestly, I really don't knock either way you're going to choose on the side. I can range them both into the advanced and unadvanced. And it's just important I say that because someone might get caught up of, I'm not going to use a chair because that, it's not the advanced way. I'm more than advanced. Well, I mean, actually you could use a chair and you could actually try to get really in touch with your glutes and your hamstrings and your quads throughout these movements. Cause it's just a generalized step up, but the complexity and the difficulty we can go throughout these phases is the idea that chair could actually be a benefit in some regards of getting more in touch. But I have no opposition. Without the chair, you're going to have to stabilize your core more, right?
Yeah.
So movement 2, we're going to do prone position, a prone position. And if you're on the chat team or if you're sitting here listening, feel free to write these down. Feel free to take some notes. I would grab out a pen and paper. Feel free to hop along, do the workouts with us, whatever it's going to take. You tackle it the way you want to tackle it. But we're going to handle a prone position. So that means lying on the ground. I'm going to tell them we're not going to do like a Superman where the feet are extended. We're not necessarily going for that because we're really just trying to almost build some execution for our pull-ups and our chin-ups later on. So that one's pretty easy. Are you going to use a towel at all, or are you kind of throwing that?
I'll just use my broom.
Okay, cool. Yep.
And use that a lot. So I'll just stick with that.
Might as well. I like it. Now here's where you get a little bit of playtime. You can either go right into, we can do the side plank from here, or we can do that glute bridge or hip extension.
Let's just go right into the side plank.
Yeah, because you can either operate that as your movement 3 or 4. It doesn't, the placing of that isn't too dramatic because we'll just follow up. So you want to do that as 3?
Sure.
Okay, number 4 then is going to be our hip or glute extension. You can go back elevated if you want. Sometimes that just helps increase the range of motion. The floor helps keep your glute activated though. But once again, it's playing with ranges of motion. Feels what's comfortable for you. That's why we're even hosting these, is we want to show some examples of how we can play with range of motion.
Yeah. We could do either one, whatever one you think would work better. My glutes are a little underactive, so I personally would like to stay on the ground, let's
go on the ground. That's why I say if your glutes aren't firing during that movement, that ground position is the more ideal spot. It's just ideal. Yeah. And then we're going to go into the push-up protraction, retraction. I'll talk a little bit about why that's in here. But it's good. It's more so to get in tune with your range of motion and your rotator cuff. So it's just simple as that. Push-up position, a protraction and a retraction. That one, if you're fatigued by then, if you want to, we can go to an incline position for those listening outside. It's just elevating, and we'll show some examples of that as we go to it. And then the last one is going to be another prone position. We're going to find out we're hanging out a lot in these prone positions, and there's a reason for that. Right. And it's just going to be either a T raise, or we're going to go into an A position, and I'll explain why we have those. But you feel good with all those motions?
Yeah, should be good.
Perfect. One thing I'm not going to say a lot, just because I know Mike's already good at this, but this is where, as we're going through these checkpoints, the standard is this. This is before we even hop into any of these movements. And it's because I still want to say it over and over again. It's this idea that set your body up, set the movement up, make sure you feel comfortable in the movement, practice it a couple times if you're at home and you don't have a coach with you. And even if you did have a coach, it's still good to practice. And it's stabilize your body. So squeeze your core, good posture, shoulder blades back and down, and then get your glutes activated. And then whatever movement we're doing, that's where you might have to either drive through your hips or drive your feet into the ground. And it's just carry these concepts through you as you go through the movement. And then the last one is think about what muscle group's going to initiate. So that's the one I'm going to walk you down. The first two, the setup and stabilize, those are on your own now. You got those down. I know Mike's got those down. I don't even have to coach him because I've seen him in these videos. He does a good job at letting himself initiate. But what I'm going to talk about is what are we trying to initiate? What are we trying to activate through these movements? So, Mike, here we go. So what are we using for the step up? That's the question. So, this is where you get the creativity juices flowing. What are you going to step up on?
Toolkit box on top of a couple of physiology books.
There we go. That's as good as it. I mean, even in the videos we filmed, I was on like the World History of America book. So you can, I mean, this is a range of motion thing. Once again, I would say for this first phase, play with 6 to 12 inches. 6 to 12 inches is pretty ideal. So as we can see here, Mike, can you tilt up your camera just a hair more? Is it able to do that?
Yep.
Because I want you guys to see his upper body during this movement. Once again, since it's a technique-driven day.
This is good?
Yep. So for those new to our program, we go with slow and controlled tempo. So and the idea of that is let those working muscle groups initiate. So everything from his feet, so his feet are planted in the ground, but you want to think his quads, his hamstrings, his glutes are the driver of this movement. We're going to go 90 seconds on his left leg. I like that he chose his left leg on top. That is the muscle group that he should be working. Then we'll switch over to the right. The thing you want to play with in your head is this idea of it's not this rock back and forth. Now, if you're very kind of clumsy with this movement, it is okay to start doing that in some respects, but you want to initiate with only that top foot. If you're really trying to get more advanced, if you're trying to get really stable, climbing up and hiking up objects to get a little bit world translation, you do want to stabilize through that first leg. Let that be the active range of motion through this one. All right, Mike, you ready to go?
Ready to go.
All right, let's see it happen. So once you're ready, Mike, drive up. I'm going to look at some notes here. That way, Mike knows. Yep, keep driving up. Squeeze through those glutes. Perfect. Control back and down. Now, I like what Mike's incorporating here. He's a little toe touch on the back foot. That's pretty cool in the sense of, yeah, you could either go with a heel or a toe touch. And you can see as he's playing with the range of motion, he's letting that knee kind of drift over the front toe, which a lot of people are kind of against, but it is actually good if your knee's healthy enough to allow that to happen, because as you kind of progress through these movements, yeah, you can stick to a 90-degree angle, but first you have to be able to stabilize throughout this entire movement. Perfect, Mike. Yep, squeeze the glutes on top. Good. Control back and down, keeping stable in that front leg. Perfect. Last 10 seconds here, Mike. Perfect. Control back and down. Keep that slow tempo. Good. And let's switch sides here, Mike. Slowly release, come out. Yep, reset yourself. We're going to switch legs and then I'll have you hop on. I'll answer some questions as we go through this one. Everything looks pretty good with them. So it's really just this idea of driving through that front heel, driving through the quad, squeezing through the glutes. And then once again, it's kind of, you can play with what's happening with that bottom foot as far as if you're really comfortable with the range of motion, you can go with a heel tap. Mike is choosing to touch with his toe. And I say that's a good, safe play. If you are, and I'll get this started and then I'll address this question because this is one of the questions that came up. So once you're ready, Mike, once again, set up, drive down through that front heel, and here we go. Slow and controlled. Why he started with that left foot? Well, if you're pretty right leg dominant, it's good to play with. I would say you should take a note of whatever heel you started with and alternate days as far as what one you should use first. Now, someone asked, if you're recovering from injuries, especially around routine A, and you're not able to hit that 80 to 90% intensity, well, that's where that's where routine B becomes really relevant, is the fact of it is such a controlled movement pattern that you don't risk a lot of, it's almost impossible to risk more injuries or overuse. In fact, it will create stimulation to where your injury is. So it could actually help in that recovery process. The same with this day. I mean, if I were to parallel a movement that is really effective, and where the step up comes into play. And you can watch Mike through this range of motion. I'm not even coaching him that much because he's doing a great job of execution on this. Is this idea of, if you can't do that reverse lunge, well, if you watch Mike through this movement, it's a reduced range of motion in that reverse lunge. And so here's a perfect implement movement you can throw into your routine A. And you could even cut up your series as this is doing a routine C, a routine B, and then a routine C again. Perfect, Mike. Last 10 seconds. Just keep that up. Nice, slow and controlled. Keep that front foot stabilized. Good. Last one. Let's come down and then slowly come out of the movement. Perfect. How's that feel there, Mike?
Feels good. Yeah, it was good to, an important thing for that one is just keep your glutes engaged at the very top as well. Don't let them rest there. Let's see.
And I think, I mean, the real important execution there is I almost could care less about how you get into the position. It's how you control yourself out of that movement. And that's where you could, you know, that's where the tendencies and some of the patterns really fail, is actually in that eccentric or the slow and controlled lengthening portion of that movement, is this idea that you just plop right onto the ground. And that's what I'm saying. Mike did a great job of choosing that heel touch, because that heel touch makes a big difference on how slow you're actually operating down. And so once again, play with that range of motion, you know, allow a little bit more knee bend in the front leg if necessary.
Right.
Perfect. Let's hop into the prone position. And once again, it's a lat pull down mimic in some sense. You don't need to have an object here. In fact, if you're new to this, I would recommend, you know, playing with, and Mike, you want to just show us a couple examples here of just without the broomstick incorporated?
Yep.
So why I like this is just to help with that range of motion. It's to help with that retraction that's going on in that pull-up motion. So the stabilizing position here is really going to extend from how hard Mike is driving his hips into the ground and squeezing his glutes. Now, the real effort is actually coming from his rotator cuff and from his traps, and this idea of pulling them down and back. And this is the same mimic of what that pull-up motion is. And so here's a great way just to execute it. It's why it's a little bit of a step back from that routine A. So once again, if you're playing with that chin up, that pull down motion is a little bit uncomfortable, here's a great movement to play with. Adding that stick in is just to mimic a pull-up bar in a way. Is your range of motion always going to be perfect when you have that in place? No, because, you know, but it is something good to practice on. So let's incorporate it, Mike. He's going to grab the stick. I would say the good distance to go is exactly what he's doing. If you see how he's setting up, he's going right about what's going to be a natural shoulder distance for him there. Where I would say is a good reason to back out of this movement. If you're feeling cracking, you're feeling this just isn't that comfortable, I would say that's the perfect example. If this isn't that comfortable to incorporate the pull-up bar, take it out. It's just a tool you can add and to challenge to see where's your range of motion at. So let's hop into this, Mike. So he's going to set up, squeeze his glutes. Yep, he's going to drive through his core. Now his low back is going to get engaged. It's okay to hyperextend in this lower back position. I'll get a little bit into that as we get going. And then Mike's going to start with just driving his shoulder blades down and back. I would think about pulling that bar then to your chest as you do it. Hold that squeeze. Good. And control back and down. And this is where, honestly, the intensity really in this movement can go anywhere from 60% to 80%. So it's good for if you're executing this movement, what is that intensity you want to reach in this day? If you're incorporating this in as your routine A and it's a high intensity day, add this into your movement. And then increase the intensity as you go. Play with objects that are going to help increase that intensity. If not, if you want to keep on the lower portion, if you want to keep it in a positive or an easy range of motion, it's just as much as you can take away that bar, spend a little bit of time. You don't even have to go into this full extended position. You can see Mike's feet are trying to lift off the ground. And so that's where it's like, that is a little bit challenging. He's naturally drifting in that motion, just as if he were on a chin-up bar. it would be the same thing. So he's driving his elbows down to his rib cage, that bar down to his chest, squeezing, holding that squeeze, and just keeping that slow tempo. He's not just hanging out on this back position, dropping down to the ground. His arms are staying off the ground. And so once again, great range of motion, or he's just executing a great range of motion. Last 10 seconds here, Mike. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, perfect. Good, give yourself a second. Yep, freely come out of that position. You know, you might not be able, especially for how much you're playing with that lower back position, that might be uncomfortable for you. And that's the whole reason we're hanging out in this position, is this idea of we're trying to get into the spinal erectors. We're trying to get into some of the best stabilizing muscles in your back. So that in itself can be a challenge of, you know, let's say you don't want to play on the ground. You're just as valuable. You can be sitting down and just playing with that range of motion in a more neutral seated position. And I would say this is a really easy, I would call this for me, you know, somewhere between a 40 to 30%. But realize where that can change is if you're not comfortable or stable on the ground, you might have to start playing with this position first and then build the confidence so you can go down to the ground and hang out in that position. You got something for us here, Mike?
Yeah, my lower back is on fire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's natural. And honestly, right, this is where we have to distinguish the point of, is that bad for you or is that good for you, right? And just because your lower back is getting activated is not a bad thing. Realize you might have chronically, and I'll if you want to go look at the muscle group, go look up your QLs, and it's some of the most tight muscle groups you can get in your body. And so they're not stimulated a lot, but in that prone position, they are. And so the second you hang out in that position, you're stimulating muscle group there. So, or you're stimulating blood flow in there. And the whole idea behind that is now that you have this blood flow circulating in that, yeah, you're getting a hard contraction, but hang out with that. And over the weeks and time, you're going to realize that it's not bad. It actually winds up being way more comfortable. Initially, it can be really uncomfortable, but the more you play with it, the better your body gets at its response.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Perfect. Let's go. Yeah. Let's go into the side plank. Side plank with retraction. So why I say with retraction is, once again, we're reacting. We're playing with your shoulder blades in this motion. So we're actually thinking about squeezing. So as Mike holds this position, I'm just going to hang out on the camera and kind of show this. As he's in the side plank position, he's got this elbow down at 90 degrees and this arm flared back. And it's the idea of you want to get your rotator cuff engaged, keeping your scap pulled back together. Usually I pull it about an image right about now, but we're not going to use it today. Now, two ways, and I'm just going to have Mike demonstrate this, is he can choose a position where his legs are getting engaged, or he can go from a knee bend position. Neither way is wrong, because half of what you're also trying to engage, and even for Mike, we're probably going to have to focus on glute squeeze as we go through this movement, just because we know his glutes are a little underactive. That's where why you might choose a knee bend position is twofold. You might get a better glute squeeze out of this. Realize that retraction isn't 100% necessary as your main focus. It might be the glute squeeze. It might be whatever you choose for the day, because there's a lot going on in this muscle because it's a core group. This is just a core movement in the sense of we're trying to get muscle groups engaged. The other half we're trying to get engaged besides the glutes is our obliques, so our side muscles down. And then once again, we're stabilizing through this shoulder. So we're even getting our serratus involved, which stems right down from your armpit. And then we're getting our retraction in. So realize there are a lot of muscle groups engaged through this. It's just, what do you feel like should be your main execution? I'm going to guess, because Mike said it, his glutes might be the best thing to be targeting as we go through this. For the sake of this video, let's just go 45 seconds each time. Is that cool with you, Mike?
Yeah, that's good.
The reason I say that is twofold. Once again, I talked about this in the beginning. Progressive overload, right? One way we can incorporate progressive overload in this is the time we spend under tension. So that could be a 45-second window all the way to that 90-second window on each side. But also realize, if you're incorporating, if you've targeted in your head one muscle group, realize you could execute in under, I would say, 30 seconds. if you were really good. Now, I like to modify that in some regards. And sorry, Mike, I'm kind of hesitating a little bit. You're getting a little more breathing time today. If you look at routine B, if you go back, watch the YouTube video, you buy the program, we'll go through this, but we use this time static contraction where we have this 30-second buildup. And that's where you could incorporate that right into this movement pattern of 30 seconds, you know, moderate, just trying to stabilize yourself. And I would say, yeah, you could increase your intensity from there and all the way to the point of just, you know, try to almost fatigue yourself out before that time. Even that could be a challenge in itself. So once again, you have to determine what's your intensity you want to give on this day, because if this is now your new routine A, so you can imply more intensity through this movement, this might be a higher intensity day as opposed to the routine A movements in itself. All right, Mike, you ready?
Ready.
Here we go. Let's go. 3, 2, 1. Perfect. Let's lift those hips up, drive those glutes forward. And so half of what we're trying to do, yep, and there Mike goes into his retraction. And just looking at him from this position, and this is sometimes where coaching helps in, I just like to analyze how effective is this group. And I'm going to say, Mike, if you can, let's supinate your grip on top. Yep, perfect. And there's a reason I chose that. I can just tell with some of his shoulder mobility that that's something he's probably got to play with a little bit, is just the supination. Good. But let's focus on that glute drive, hips going forward. Let's increase intensity here, Mike, if you're able to. Perfect. Just keep trying to stabilize. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Good. Slowly release. And half of the reason I'm cutting Mike short there, I could guess, you know, he could go longer if he wanted, but once again, we're going to play with the time frame we've got so we can get through everything. But that's up to you on how a lot of freedom is kind of given. If you get really good at kind of getting in tune with yourself, well, that's going to dictate your time. That can cut down on why this could extend anywhere from an hour to 20 minutes. You could really get the effect of everything you need done in 20 minutes. And that's really the goal we're aiming for, right? Is let's execute this as fast as possible. Let's get out of this as fast as possible. We got more stuff going on throughout our day. So let's minimize the approach. And that's the whole goal of the programming in itself, is the minimal effective dose. What is the minimal effort I can apply to get the most effective dose out of this movement? All right, Mike, you ready to go?
Ready.
3, 2, 1. His execution was perfect on this. I'll walk a little bit through. I just want to look at his shoulder once again. Yep, a little bit supinated grip. Actually, Mike, I'm going to have you pivot your hips, your bottom hips, your left hips, a little bit more towards the camera. Yeah, right there. It's going to be tough to maintain. Let me just look at our time. Perfect. So half of the stabilizing, once again, is going to be done through that bottom leg, through your legs. And that's where you might have to pick the knee position just to help some of that stabilize. It's going to be through the obliques. So right now it's going to be his left obliques. And then through that elbow, that left elbow driving hard into the ground. Let's add 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Good. Slowly come out of the movement there, Mike. Perfect. Give yourself a second. Mike, that's an important movement. Let's walk through how you felt through that movement. Like, just give us some stuff just mentally, what it kind of felt like to go through that movement.
Yeah, so as soon as you told me to rotate my hips a little bit, a little more pressure on my elbows because my hips twist in an upward rotation. So more pressure on my elbows. I felt my obliques kind of trigger a little bit more there. I was really focusing on my obliques and my glutes on that one.
Yep.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, that's as simple as it needs to be. I mean, it's what are you trying to initiate with? I had that because if you were to look at it, if you were looking at it from my perspective, his hips were almost, it's like his body was rotated down to the ground, and realize that's a natural tendency for your bodies to actually allow for a little bit of rotation. So to trigger the obliques, then you twist and you're almost, that's where like get a wall to concentrate and ask yourself, how parallel MI to the wall. And then that angle is almost like this 45-degree angle off the ground, right? So I'm going to use the bottom of my screen here to drive up and down. And I play with angles a lot. Angling is everything, because once you understand that there are natural angles within your body, like that 90-degree range of motion in the shoulder. And for instance, if that was putting too much pressure on your shoulder, Mike, drop to that knee bent position. Mm-hmm. And that goes for everyone out there listening who wants to attempt it and they're feeling tension where they shouldn't be feeling tension. Step the movement back. Don't make this an ego-driven thing of like, this is how it has to be done. That is not the case. It is, what are we trying to initiate and work through this? Because that's more important. And that's where execution is just, it's tenfold. And the fact of, if you spend more time executing properly for yourself, the better you're going to be in the long-term run, as far as you will get more done in a shorter amount of time.
Right.
That's the whole concept of train smarter, not always harder. You got to be really intuitive to how are you training? How in tune are you with these movement patterns? So let's go into the next one. I love this one. Easy execution, easy setup. It's the hip extension or glute bridge. Mike just laying down on the ground. Doesn't have to think much about his shoulder blades in this movement. That's why it's so effective. All he has to really think about is heels driving down into the ground. I think, Mike, are you going to lift the toes off the ground, or are you keeping it?
I'm going to lift my toes off.
Yeah, I know he likes doing that. And it's a great movement. You don't have to choose to do that. It's just the tendency of sometimes to lean too much onto your toes and incorporate thin movement. I won't go too in depth about that one yet. It's just why he's lifting the toes off the ground is to get the calves more engaged, to get the hamstrings more engaged, and realize that drives right into his glutes. And that's as simple as this is. So we're thinking about glute drive almost through an entire movement of squeezing the glutes, holding them on the top. If he has a little bit of more extension, I'm okay with that. I'm going to let it slide, because in time, the glutes will become the main driver and it'll take the pressure off the lower back. It's not uncommon for that to happen. So Mike, you ready to go here?
Ready.
All right. 3, 2, 1. Good. Think about extending through those hips driving up towards the ceiling. Yep. He's going to keep driving those hips, squeeze his glutes as he does. Hold for 2 seconds when you get that, once you get that squeeze, and then control back and down. Now we say about 2 seconds, but if you're really firing, if you're feeling that movement firing, hang out there for that amount of time. Like, you might want to hang out there for 2, 3 seconds, 4 seconds, 5 seconds, whatever is going to get those glutes to initiate. And why I say that is, once again, think about the orientation of the glutes. They drive together. And so in that position, its glutes are driving together. And if you are able to initiate to drive that movement, you should hang out for that time. If you aren't able to do it, it's, once again, maybe you do need to hang out in that position for a second or two longer and not just dive out of the movement as soon as you get to the top. Hang out in those positions. In fact, a time static hold, just like on day 2, might be more appropriate from the sense of how well am I able to actually execute through those glutes. To get a little bit more glute fire, he might think about driving through his hips. He might think about getting his hamstrings involved. Hamstrings are, once again, all these back posterior chain muscles are not very intuitive muscles. They're not muscles we think about engaging with a lot. In fact, as a society, we tend to be a little bit more quad driven or front leg driven, in the sense of we can feel those muscle groups work quite a bit, but we can't feel the back of our legs quite a bit. And the more you get engaged with those, the stronger you're going to feel in a movement like this, or the more comfortable you're going to be able to go into a squat, into that wall press squat, or we kind of varied the name on that a little bit, but that's the first movement on routine B. Perfect, Mike. Let's do one more, and then let's slowly come out of this. Good. Just slowly bringing those hips down to the ground. He's going to execute one more. He's thinking those hips drive to the ceiling. Good. Squeeze. And slowly come back and down. Now, the beauty of why I love this movement is the pure fact that we spend a lot of days sitting, and it's sometimes we just don't have control, given the work environment, given the school environment, of not allowing ourselves to get out of this position. And so this is actually just a movement in itself, as a recovery movement of how do we get out of our tight hip flexors? How do we get out of anterior pelvic tilt? How do we start incorporating, and it's just that the muscle groups that are getting overactivated and the muscle groups that are getting underactivated due to a lot of sitting. And so that's where a movement like this is so special sometimes, is we don't incorporate a lot into our programming. As far as just society, when you look at the mainstream media, it's just that it's not really there. And it's more so because it's like, it's hard to put weight and load these movements. It's hard to put a barbell or a dumbbell on your hips and execute those movements. But there's a reason why it's hard. It's a reason why that's an uncomfortable position. It's like, we can't even get to full hip extension. And so that's where I talk about squeezing your glutes on the top there, is just to get out of tight hip flexors and to get your glutes engaged. What do you got for us, Mike?
Yeah, that was really good. One thing I did notice that I tended to arch my lower back a little too much instead of pushing my hips up. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing that you can be aware of is don't misuse your lower back instead of your hips. Making sure you're pushing through your glutes before you start arching your lower back.
And so what I want to bring into there is that's really complex. It's very complex to disride that system, because the fact is, sadly, that's a programmed condition within our body to rely. And you talk about why does society as itself have such tight lower backs, right? That is number one. Why do, everyone almost comes in with some type of hip imbalance. I mean, there's almost 30 muscle groups in your hips, right? So why always tight lower backs? And it's this idea that the translation pattern, and this is something I got from Cal, so it's a little, gem of, why the lower back trying to hyper arch there. The back is trying to control the movement. It's trying to help out. It's used to taking the blunt of the force. And so to not do that movement, we're like, even if your back overactivates, to not do that movement is just going to make you almost in a worse state. So that's why I say, like, you almost have to let that tendency flare, because the more you spend in that movement and the more time you spend executing that movement, you will go from heel to hamstring to glute to lower back. But right now, your natural tendency, your firing pattern of your body is to go heel to low back to hamstring to glute. And that's very, very complex. But the second you can distinguish that, now think about what your pattern should be as you go through that movement. Heel to hamstring to glute, then to lower back. I almost screwed that up. Once again, I'll say it again. Heels to hamstring to glute to low back. And the more time, that's why this is an activation. This is a technique-driven day from the sole complex of that is really intense. That is trying to get an organized system. But our body's natural tendency is to screw that up, because the lower back can take a blunt of that force. And I'll just say the psoas muscle plays a big role in that. There's so many muscle groups that are causing it to chain react that way, just because it's not sure what to do. It's trying to help out the body, and the glutes, the hamstrings all sit all day, right? If we spent a lot of time sitting all day, they're easily relaxed muscle groups. So who do you think takes the blunt of that force?
The quads.
Well, your quads and your lower back, right? They're like, well, we can, if I'm sitting all day, I'm almost naturally in a wall sit position, right?
Right. Yeah.
So my glutes are relaxing, my hamstrings are relaxing, and my lower back is compressing and sitting down. And I'm sorry, I'd like to get on this little wind, but we need to know why. Why is my lower back getting so active? And it's because we're underactivating the glutes. We're unactivating our hamstrings. And the second we hang on these movements and we spend time in these movements to get our hamstrings involved, to get our glutes involved, now all of a sudden our lower back will be like, okay, I can deal with this. So here's where we're just almost going to wind this right into the next movement of this push-up, protraction, retraction. Part of this is to help your rotator cuff now. And the idea of I'm going to go from a prone position, this almost push for success in the long run anyways. All right, Mike. So let's just hop into this, just so we're more conscious about time. We got two movements to go through. Let's hop into it. So push-up position, just like it's executed in day one, he's stabilizing through his hamstrings, his glutes, core's engaged. We're ready to fire. I can see Mike's ready to go. So let's actually start out in that protracted position. So almost round that T-spine, that upper back, and you should feel a stretch. And the idea now is to release let it drop down and pull those shoulder blades back and down. Perfect. And now let's go back up. Slow and controlled. And it's tough to stay slow and controlled in this movement. I would say the best time static or 90-second window you could play with in this one is just this protracted position right here. Just because there's a lot of tension going on in your rotator cuff. We talk about how many problems there's happened at your rhomboids. You hear about a lot of rotator cuff issues. Well, look at who's having to stabilize this movement. It's his shoulders, it's his triceps, it's his, everything that's leading up to this chain. So we're trying to get more mobile. We're trying to increase the range of motion in this position. Also, we can increase the range of motion to a little bit higher standard movement, and that's our push-up. So I'm just kind of letting Mike go back and forth here. And so now he's retracting his shoulder blades. He's pulling down and back. He's holding, he's squeezing his shoulder blades together. He's thinking down and back through his shoulder blades. Good. And now he's going to round through his upper back. Perfect. Good. We got about, let's go 10 more seconds here, Mike. Hold that squeeze. Good. Now round through that back. Perfect. And it's tough to execute. I'll say this one can ramp your intensity pretty tense. So this is where you might need to drop to your knees, not have to focus so much on the core strength incorporated in this movement. That was perfect, Mike. Sorry. Sometimes I take all the credibility off of Mike, who's sitting here blowing his brains out sometimes on how hard he's working. And I just sit here and I keep talking. But I feel bad. I'm sorry there, Mike.
No, that's good.
And it's this idea of, if this is tough, if this is a tough movement, once again, technique is everything on this day. Technique is everything. I wanted to make it to the priority. Think about it this way. Your day one is almost 90%. Your day two is almost 100%. Here's your day where you should be in the 70 to 80% window. And yeah, you saw Mike go above. I would say you went above that window in this range. And he's playing, right? He's exploring with his body. And so you might need to drop to your knees just to take the load off of the intensity, especially if you're not recovering well. And I would say that is the deterring factor of, how should I know to push more? How well are you recovering? Right. Did you feel like if Mike, for instance, did routine B on Wednesday, and now it's Friday, just playing, with the time frame. I know it's Monday, but let's say he did that. If he didn't recover, if he wakes up Friday and he's feeling like 70%, what's the intensity Mike should hit? Mike, what intensity should you be giving that day?
I would say 70%.
Yeah, even 60, 50%. I don't even, just show up.
Right.
I don't care about, as long as you showed up and you're playing a little bit of execution, you're playing with more some time static stuff. Even the time static, you're hanging out in moderate. You are programming yourself to be, I'm not even going to say, you're programming yourself to be, I want to say it more athletic is the word I want, but if your determination of hanging on to this podcast is to be more fit, right? To be better rounded human being, to be, let's say, more functional movement patterns, then your goal is you're showing up to this podcast. You're watching this live seminar for a reason. You're trying to ingrain in yourself that you are that person. So just showing up, even if you can't give 100% that day, is good enough. Let's play with that day then. Let's hang out with that day, where even if you showed up for a routine B and you weren't able to hit 100%, I don't care. If you hung out with moderate for every single of those movements, you still showed up. You still gave something that day. You just said, I'm not feeling it today. The excuses are out the window at this point. You're at home. You're at home. You have the room to execute these movement patterns. You have the time, the max amount of, you could spend 10 minutes doing this and find a purpose and a drive as to why you're doing this day. And I'm sorry. I mean, I gotta hang out. I gotta, free vent a little bit, because I had to coach myself on this stuff all the time. I had to tell myself this nonstop of like, I can't keep coming up with these excuse patterns. I got to break out of these. If I really want to be, a great coach, I got to stop making all these excuses. And instead, I got to just show up and I got to give what I got that day. And it might not be everything, but it might be enough to just convince myself that my time is valuable. So it better be well spent. And I kid you not, if you spend more time making excuses, you're wasting your own time. Sorry. It is what it is.
Good. It's good to hear.
All right, Mike, let's lay down. We're going back to the protractor position now, or sorry, prone position. Why this prone position, and how does this relay back to our glute bridge or hip extension? And once again, why talk so, why I'm spending more time probably ranting today in some extent or going more in depth is this idea of, look, if you have a purpose and you have a why and you understand why, like these aren't like, and that's the difference between this and what's being done on, let's just say, the internet and some excuses. And I won't take away, some people are doing some great stuff out there, but it's more so, my question is to you is this, is do you think they have a purpose as to why they put all these movements together, one after another? Even that orientation of movements throughout the programming has to be intentional. It has to be purposeful. If it's not purposeful, then where's this program going? What are we trying to get to? What is the end goal after we do all this? And if you don't have that, you have to ask yourself, how long can I really stick with this? And that can be in a large extent. And why we go back to this prone position is we just went, from the T-spine. Now we're going to another component of the T-spine that gets neglected is we're going to do another rotator cuff movement. It's the T raise. So he's just literally rotating his shoulder blades back and squeezing. If that's an uncomfortable position, Mike, you want to demonstrate the A position? So you want to think about when you look at your traps, they run twofold. So there's this diamond portion at the bottom of the traps, and there's this triangle portion that goes in. The the T position that Mike is going to use pulls the shoulder blades back in this range of motion. The A position looks at that bottom range. So once again, it's pulling those shoulder blades down and back, and it does it naturally. So I'm going to demonstrate that just one more time here, is he's pulling his shoulder blades back in that movement. So that's a tough movement to get engaged because that plays everything on the round position of rounding through your shoulder blades. Is that bottom portion of your traps has to be able to turn on because it's going to help stabilize your rotator cuff as you go through a range of motion. So that's why it's really important to either play with the A position or the T position. And once again, this is something we can incorporate at the end of this video, which I'll probably take about five minutes just to kill it out because I know we're coming on the time cap here. But Mike's going to stabilize himself, and I'll walk more through this as Mike gets going. I just want to get Mike going here. Drive your hips into the ground, squeeze your glutes, and now just think about your shoulder blades drawing back and together, arms lifting off the ground. Yep, yeah. Just Mike's adjusting himself away from the couch. Perfect. And his hands will naturally go back almost to an A position if need be. Yep, he's going to hold his shoulder blades squeeze, and then he's going to gradually release and let those shoulder blades come down. So I didn't actually answer this point. So Mike, you just keep going away. He's doing a great job. Not too much else to really focus on here except for those shoulder blades. Just think about those shoulder blades squeezing together and his hips are driving into the ground. Why are we back in this prone position is the idea of we're trying to get our spinal erectors once again engaged. So they originate actually on the back of your shoulders, right at the bottom of your rotator cuff. And so the idea with this is crazy is the idea that it goes right down into the back of your spine. So if you're getting stabilized through those spinal erectors, no longer does the lower back have to play such an important role of why it's overactive. And so that's the whole idea in itself is just us hanging out in this position again. We're just trying to tune our body with hanging out and getting the spinal erectors more engaged because they're a muscle group that, I mean, how many times does someone say, I'm going to go hit my spinal erectors today, when they're going to execute or they're going to the gym? I mean, it's pretty seldom if you ask me, but it's such an important muscle group that why not use our technique-driven day to try to execute this movement? Let's get one more here, Mike, and then slowly come out of that movement. Now, if this prone position, once again, is not comfortable, just come to a seated position. And all you have to do is just practice with that range of motion, either in that T position or in that A position. And once again, just think about the ranges of motions. This is a great day to just incorporate in front of a mirror, just to get in front of a mirror and just watch yourself. I wouldn't say on the ground I advocate it that much. And that's why a coach does help is you don't have to think about a mirror and you don't have to think about, what am I doing? Am I doing it right or wrong? But, if I'm sitting and I'm, I can literally just watch myself on the camera. I'm like, okay, how is my range of motion? Well, for me, I already know what I got to do. I got to supinate my grip, and that supination, that's a more proper range of motion. I'm parallel to the ground as I do this. Now I'm going to go down to the A position. I'm actually going to take out the supination because I can already tell that I got to be in a neutral grip from this. And look at right there. Perfect. Now I'm thinking 45-degree angles off the ground. So I went from parallel down to 45, assume this is our 90-degree angle as we go through this. And sorry, I'm talking a lot of angles, but the second we incorporate angles and we incorporate, that is true range of motion. How well are you able to reach your arms overhead and now your entire body in parallel to the floor, your whole body in comparison to the floor is perpendicular. And that's really strong. Like you hang out with some of that stuff, it might seem complex, but the whole idea is we can, we're playing with that. We're just playing with it to some degree. We're giving it a little bit more intentionality as to why we're doing certain things.
Right. And angles, like you're saying, angles are really important because specific angles will fire specific muscle groups. So, I mean, if you're at a bad angle, at a wrong angle, you're going to work the wrong pair of muscles. And that's for any exercise, not just the one we did.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why I say it is like, if this, like the fact of, if you're on this webinar, right, and you've hung out with these workouts for, let's say 4 to 6 weeks now, right? I would call that the end of phase 1 in some regards. I'm going to call it phase 1, like a highlighter over it, because now I'm going to start all over again. And you know what? The next 4 to 6 weeks, I'm going to apply some intentionality behind what am I trying to get out of this, right? Maybe I went overboard on execution. Maybe I just try to get the movement done and I didn't want to think about what is the value behind doing this, right?
Right.
Now I can sit back and I can go, okay, what movements, and I can go down through my notes and what movements did I execute really well? And what movements should I almost aspire or try to reach over the next 4 to 6 weeks? Because that's where this phase 1 is really just another program in itself. As look at how many modifications we built in. I mean, Mike, how many modifications do we have to build in?
Yeah, a lot.
And that was all for the onboarding, right?
Right.
That was all for onboarding, getting people psyched up, involved. And I'm more so saying this in the belief and kind of just the intentionality. I'm going to say that word again because intention is everything. Of we should be playing with these movements, these movements are meant to somewhat be challenging, and some of them should be easy execution. And so that's why I'm saying your routine A, is this an execution day? Is this a technique day? Is this just, what day does this mean for you? That's why that routine B is almost 100% a given execution day. So maybe when you look at your routine A, it's like, well, what movements should I pick? What movements went really well for me? And what movements were really poor, but I want to execute them. I want to find a way to make this work for me, right? And so that's why, yeah, we are going to go somewhere with this whole program. We're on phase 2. Phase 3 is in the making right now. But the real value in this is going to be what is it that I bring to the table, right? What is it that I'm trying to improve on? And that's why a lot of those movements, yeah, like let's talk about the chin up, right? That's not an easy movement. And to be honest, we didn't even get into the in-depth processes involved in executing a chin up really well. We just did a chin up. But in the reality, we could do an activated chin up, a passive chin up / a hollow. I mean, by that, I mean a hollow position versus an arch position chin up. And there is a lot to be working with within your body. And the second you get involved and you get playing with these ideas, well, now that next 4 to 6 weeks is now intentional and you have your goal and you can drive closer to that goal than before. And the reason I say that is because a lot of going through this routine C is we're at the end of the road in a lot of ways, but it's time to start the journey where it really truly needs to start. And it's all over again. And the intentionality of now we have a purpose, we have a drive, we have our mission set in front of us. We know what movements we need to work on. We know what movements aren't working for us. So let's back step and let's figure out what did and what didn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, let's slay it from there. And why I say that is like, I'll get into in depth probably some other time about my Cal stories, but intentionality, why I repeat that over and over and over again is because it is everything. If you don't know why you're here, talk with a coach because, that's the whole reason. We're going to help you figure out what are we trying to master? Is it a physique thing? Is it a movement pattern thing? Is it, you just don't even feel comfortable in certain positions. And that could be as easy as just saying sitting, right? And that's where I want to leave it, is this idea of find your mission, find your purpose. And if you hang along with that, you're coming for a ride in a lot of ways, because that's where this all stems from in the first place is, we're forward moving in that progression. If you find someone, and I'm going to put this out there. If you need help, reach out to a coach. Step one. If you have someone that can help you stay inspired, which might be a friend, get them involved, get them on the program. Step two, that might be it. Step three is maybe it is you who needs to step inside and figure out, am I just not motivating myself enough? Am I not actually finding that inner strength enough? So I want to leave it there. Mike.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate, before you do every exercise, think, why are you doing this? Are you doing this just to get it done, just to check it off? Are you actually trying to get better, get stronger? It's really up to you guys. But yeah, think about why you're doing it, and just a practical thing. What muscle groups am I trying to engage here? And then focus on those muscle groups, not just focusing on the movement itself, but also which muscle groups am I trying to fire for each of these movements that we put together for you guys. So just a couple of quick things to think about before you get started each time you do it. And like you said, this is only twice a week, maybe 3 times a week, depending on how often.
And the max, I mean, like 30, let's say 30 to 40 minutes on the long end. Yeah, like this one an hour today, but that's because, we're trying to walk through this, and honestly, that's the crazy part. I'm going to hang out real quick with that real tight, is this idea of, like the more time you spend up front, the less time you spend in the background. So yeah, you might spend an hour one day going through this stuff, but the goal then is almost, can I get this done in a faster amount of time?
Right.
Working the muscle groups I'm supposed to be working.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So Mike, thanks for killing it. Last 3 workouts, you did phenomenal. If one of you guys is out there and you feel like someone needs to watch this, share the YouTube video to them. I mean, it's as simple as that. Watch that YouTube video over and over and over again. You might get something new out of it every time. It might not even be me talking. It might just be watching Mike do the movement, because that's everything. It's just half the time it's just watching that movement, watching other people perform the movement. So now not only via the platform, you have me executing the movement, but now you have Mike on YouTube executing the movement. And we're going to continue, I'm sure, and, we're going to continue down the route of giving different, I think I'm going to throw her under the gun and see if we can get Becky executing some of this stuff. But anyways, let's leave it there. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Mike, once again, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for putting me through it.
All right. We'll see you guys. You guys have a great rest of your day.